Welcome to the Echo Oscar Delta podcast, where we talk to Navy EOD techs and hear the stories that they want to share. All ideas, thoughts, and statements are those of the guest and the host of Echo Oscar Delta, and not of Navy EOD or Navy as a whole. Today I have Commander retired Larry Ronan. He did 29 years in the Navy, 2 years in the Michigan National Guard, joined the Navy at 17, in from 1950 to 1979, deployed countless times, some of those being on the USS Tarawa, the Fraser twice, the Ranger twice, Vietnam 4 times, and to include a PCS to Vietnam. That interested to see what that was like. Been stationed pretty much all over, deployed all over. I'm just excited to hear what you have to say. I appreciate you sitting down with me.
Yeah, actually, the deployments to Vietnam, there was 5 of them. 5? Okay. It was kind of strange way that it happened. It turned out that it was my relief got banged up in the Mobile Riverine down the Delta. And so I went back in thinking it was going to be to finish his tour, which he had 2 or 3 months left. And it turned out to be 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And so that gave me a total of 3.5 years in Vietnam. But I can go into that a little bit later. The first thing is that what EOD was when I first came across the business, and it was no senior officers. We didn't have any commanders or lieutenant commanders, and of course not a captain or an admiral. We had no staff officers, but we were in about the same situation as UDT. And the organizations at that time, I think Beach Jumpers were still there, and a couple other cats and dogs is what we called them, because the money you got to operate your organization with was whatever fell off the table that the bigger commands, especially the Hayes Gray Underway organization, had to do. So it was kind of bare bones. We didn't have the field uniforms you wore. I was enlisted, so of course I wore the dungarees with white hat, and the chiefs and officers wore wash khakis. And in fact, the green uniform, except for possibly the school, or I think UDT had I think they were wearing green at the time. It was very loose, and the assignments were quite different. In some locations you'd go and there'd be 1 or 2 EOD people. That was the entire organization by that unit, or there would be 5 or 6, and it seemed like the Bureau really didn't know where everybody was at. Going back a little bit farther was that the organization they established during World War II for EOD was at American University, and they graduated in a number of classes. And of course, there was a lot of officers that were brought in and did great work. But when World War II was over, they all went home because they were reserve officers, only in for that particular event. Yeah. So it was EOD and UDT and the cats and dogs were just kind of static. Korea came along and they started looking for these organizations again, and they didn't have them. So again, they went out and recruited a lot of young officers that came in, did a great job. Korea what do we call it? It wasn't supposed to be a war. It was a police action. The Korea police action was over with. And the officers went home, and they again were reserve. So it left the Navy with a bare bones organization with people scattered throughout the fleets and shore establishments. And then Vietnam came along. And to be perfectly honest, I think that Vietnam was the event, 10-year event, that really solidified the need for these special operations and special warfare people.
Yeah.
That no longer were you considered sort of a second-class sailor, I guess is how I felt we were treated at one time. And you see what the people who followed us have done with the organization. I mean, they have captains and commanders, and now I think 2 rear admirals, and somebody to get out and speak for the organization and guide it, guard it, and fund it, which was turns out to be very, very important.
Yeah.
But that was pretty much the background in how I see it. That it came into really being. I mean, EOD was there since World War II, but not in the terms that you see it today with the staffs and I mean, the EOD officers are scattered throughout the organization, and it appears from now the sidelines that it is really something amazing.
I got a quick question.
Sure.
So, I'd never thought about how it didn't have really any structure. Like, it came in as needed, were EOD, and then left. One of the big things that is a benefit with the structure that we have right now is, the trainings and the lessons learned from the different conflicts and wars. How was there anywhere that kind of that was kept? Because I know at first, I guess the training was fairly short compared to what it is now. From what I've heard before, what was like the actual like EOD school training like?
Well,
if you're going to get into that, then I can. Yeah, I'll just wait.
Let me give you the personal example. Was that I had initially been assigned to aviation out of recruit training.
Okay.
And I didn't want to be in aviation. I was 17 or 18 years old, and I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I didn't want to do that. So there was quite a problem getting out of that and into finally mine warfare school at Yorktown, Virginia. And I did well in the A school. They kept me for the B school. And at that time, I heard about EOD and UDT and all of these things, and that sounded like something I really wanted to do. So I applied for it. Well, neither organization were taking on people. The school was hard to get, and then they had a set of requirements that you had to be a second-class petty officer on your second enlistment, because they didn't want to spend the money if you were going to get out and go away somewhere, which is quite different than it is now. Is recruiting people at the lowest level to enter the program and grow from the seaman level on up through the ranks to chief or beyond.
Yeah.
And so it took me quite a while, but I was pretty persistent and possibly called a pain in the ass, but I kept pushing for it and finally got selected to go to underwater swimmer school. By then I had almost 6 years in the Navy, and the school was about, 10 weeks, and it was 1956 is when I went, and the school itself was fairly new, teaching scuba to a lot of people who had not encountered it up to that time. There was even old UDT people that had not been trained in some of the scuba systems that they had at the time. And first-class divers were coming there because first-class divers really didn't have to know how to swim.
Yeah.
They always used the hard hat.
Oh,
and we were
sense.
still being trained in the hard hat, which was fine. But that came later. Some of the equipment that they taught at the underwater swimmer school was initially the Aqualung two-stage double hose. And I still see some people using those. Another one was the North Hill, and that was, I think, completely experimental. It had nothing to offer.
Really?
The other one was the Scott Hydropack, and that was a version of the Scott air breathing system that firemen use.
Okay. Interesting.
Yes, it was. The tanks were exactly the same, and the regulator looked quite the same. Although I think that the charm of that one was it was the only full face mask.
Okay.
That they taught at the time.
Yeah.
And so I never saw it again in the fleet. I never saw the North Hill again. I did see the Aqualung. We did get one mixed gas system. It was the first one I think they came out with, the Mark V. And the Mark V was reliably unreliable. They were working on, at that time, they were still working on the Mark VI. And I got involved with the Mark VI later on in life. From there, it went directly to Indian Head. I think some of the classes went to an Army school for chemical warfare munitions. But we went directly to Indian Head. By then, I was a first-class petty officer. And that's where we did the second-class diving school. And that was in the Potomac River. I remember the master diver, later master chief, master diver, Sopchak, probably one of the greater divers and master divers that there was. He went on into diving after he retired from the Navy. So he was still the master diver.
Yeah.
Always the master diver. So we got the Mark V, the hard hat training, and Jack Brown shallow water dive system. And you could use the Jack Brown to get down on the ice to break a hole in it so that you could put the hard hat down in it. The Potomac River at the time was not all that great. It was a lot of contamination was in the river, killing fish, and it was just not anything you really wanted to spend a lot of time in.
Yeah.
From there, it went on to underwater ordnance, mines, torpedoes, depth charges, then surface and air munitions, and finally nuclear weapons. That was a separate course and a separate graduation certificate, actually. But after that, so we all split up. Some of the people in our class did not get EOD billets.
Really?
They were returned to a couple were returned to the fleet, and others went to they were already first-class divers, and so they went to diving activities, not EOD.
Okay.
Which was kind of a mystery when there were not that many people in the business at the time. But my assignment was USS Ranger, and it turned out I was still first class petty officer, and it turned out that there were 5 other EOD people assigned there, and
Really?
we were all in one division. And then I guess about a year later, the Bureau figured out that some carriers had none, and we had 6. And so they straightened it out, and we finally wound up. By the time we made a second cruise, was that there was 3 of us.
So, sorry. So it was there wasn't. It was you just your PCS orders was that ship.
USS Ranger.
That's interesting. That's
Well, there were no groups.
right. That
the organization at the time was whoever was on a carrier. You were all PCS, and so your boss is the gunnery officer or commanding officer of that ship.
okay.
Same thing with ammunition ships, and that was where EOD were deployed. Then some shore establishments had some EOD people, maybe 2, 3, 1.
Interesting.
It wasn't consistent,
Yeah.
and there was no umbrella organization that coordinated all of that. Everybody was dealt with separately at the bureau level by an officer or chief petty officer that may or may not know anything about EOD. And UDT, again, was in the same boat
Yeah.
as we were.
Interesting.
And and so you could have a EOD billet at one point, and then your next set of PCS orders, like in my case, you could be assigned to a mine warfare job.
Really?
And again, there was nobody to oversee this. It was in the bureau any way they wanted to do it.
Yeah.
So Ranger was interesting. We were the ship's divers. Of course, they had nuclear weapons, and so that was, supposedly our main job. But whenever they were flying ordnance, we had keep 1 or 2 people on the flight deck, and we did have hung ordnance several times, and but if they were close to shore and the plane could make it, they would usually fly the plane to an air station rather than bring it back aboard with hung ordnance.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was kind of exciting. And then between cruises 1 and 2 to the Far East, we were getting ready to deploy. In fact, it was our last training that we were going to do out of Alameda before we deployed to the Far East again. And 2 guided missilemen, young guys, broke into one of our magazines, and it was the magazine that had 325 pounds of bulk black powder. And everybody goes, oh,
Yeah.
well, black powder at those days, aircraft carriers or some ships that had saluting batteries, carried black powder because you reloaded your shells. When you made a salute, you come into foreign port, and you fired so many, and then you reloaded those with black powder and the new primer and all of that. Well, they don't do that anymore, but these two guys broke in and either had a cigarette in their mouth or they had a paint scraper when they opened the side of it, and the 325 pounds went off. And it blew out into another magazine, a rocket motor magazine, and they started flying around. And then, fortunately, went into a magazine that had bomb fins in it, inert material, and it blew open a fuel black oil line that flooded the space, and that was pretty much the godsend for that, is that the black oil smothered everything. And so everybody went to general quarters, of course, and then figure out where the problem is. And it's down on the 7th deck, which is out of sight.
Yeah.
And it's full of black oil. So slowly but surely, we got in down there and found that there's no unexploded ordnance now that has to be dealt with, and it couldn't get through the oil anyway. But over a period of several weeks, we got everything. We handled everything that came out of the rocket motor magazine to make sure that it was okay. So we spent a lot of time down in the oil, and of course the two that broke in were badly damaged.
Yeah.
And the takeaway from that one was that above this magazine that had the black powder in it was the nuclear weapons space, and it had rolled the reinforcing plate up to the ceiling. It was probably a 3-inch thick plate, and it rolled it up to the overhead. And so it sort of proved that the guy that designed the 6th deck didn't know what was on the 7th deck, or vice versa. So anyway, I got promoted to chief. Happy day. I think that may have been one of the best feelings that I've ever had, was getting that far, because a chief was all from the day that you joined the Navy. Chief is always the one that you look forward to, that they're the ones that guide and lead, and really something. And so to join that group was something. Of course, we were in Japan, and the initiation isn't like it is today. They didn't do car washes. They were well, I'll leave that go, but they were kind of brutal.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah, they were tough. You spend a lot of time blindfolded, and well, it's better left to car washes.
Yeah.
Well, it's a new Navy, and it's quite different than my experience.
Yeah.
My next job was Crane, Indiana, Naval Ammunition Depot, 100 square miles. They manufactured munitions there, certain things. They filled, explosively filled a lot of projectiles and things there. It looked to be quiet, but it really was not. In our job, we had an EOD team, and we had, I think we had 7 guys there at one time for a 3-man detachment.
Really?
Yeah. And our responsibility there was destruction of unserviceable ammunition, and they used to bring that into the into the depot in railroad cars, and they'd bring them up near the demolition area. And they had a crew of civilians that opened the boxes and got the munitions out and set up 10 pits, and we did that every day. And so for an EOD tech, I mean, that was fun. I was blowing stuff up every day.
That's awesome.
Yeah, life don't get any better.
Yeah, and there's less. I mean, you can't be lax, but at least it's not digging it out of the ground that's already fired. You can.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, make a lot of noise.
Yeah.
So, I was also the chief master at arms. Of course, there's only about 10 guys that lived in the barracks and all that, and they were attached to some other unit. And we were all the game wardens because they had 5,000 deer on 100 square miles, and so well, you couldn't hunt them, and they were fenced in.
Yeah.
And so that turned out to be a problem with too many being there, and so the state game warden was welcome on the base, and so we organized different hunts and that sort of thing. It was an interesting place to be, and my assignment was going to be for 3 years, and then I messed it all up. I got promoted to ensign, and again, you know, being I guess promotions are always very memorable times in your life. But because I was a brand new ensign, my first job was Naval Air Station Adak, Alaska.
Oh, yeah?
Out the Aleutian Islands. And so I was the EOD officer, the ordnance officer, the diving officer, game warden, and whatever else somebody else didn't want to do. I was on court-martial boards, and very, very busy place. But I had a great, I was in charge of the armory, and it was just a picture place to be. The gunner's mates who had been assigned there really did a great job on maintaining it. They're just beautifully done, and they used to use the armory as a place to bring visitors and show them how great it was, and we had a pool table, so we used to get some of the other officers down there and challenge us to shooting pool.
Nice.
But one of the main jobs was clearing ordnance on Adak, and that was left over from training that the Army did during World War II. Was that there was no requirement to go out and pick up duds or do anything with duds. If you fired a shell and it didn't go off, oh well, fire another one and see what happens there. And so that's essentially what they did. And then from there, the Army went to Attu, and that was an invasion. Japanese had occupied Attu, Kiska, and Agatu, 3 islands, way on the end of the Aleutians. And for some reason, people always wanted to, or some organizations, weather people, usually wanted to go out to Attu. And of course, they needed an escort because there were still mines. This would have been 1962, and the war was over. And I guess, well, the Japanese were there in 1943, so this is almost 20 years.
Yeah.
And so we're still providing services that we would clear lanes to where they wanted to go and then escort them through there, and no side trips.
Yeah.
But there were still caves where the Japanese had had stored things, and we never went into those. Just escort people on through, but there was a lot of ordnance that we cleared just making the paths through there. That was a 2-year tour, and not as bad as it seems. It's remote, but I think the people there made it quite livable. It was kind of funny. The commissary was probably it was one room with shelves in it, and everything had to be brought in by aircraft. And so if you ordered a can of corn and they didn't have one, they would order a case of corn. And when it came in, you got your can of corn, they put the rest on the shelf.
Yeah.
And that's how they stocked the place. And when they ran out, they just ordered another case of corn. But you couldn't keep everything, and so things were a little austere, but they managed to pull it off. Next job was Naval Ammunition Depot, Earl, and there were 2 teams there, and I was Lieutenant JG, and the other team was a lieutenant by the name of Albert Banaski, and so Albert was pretty near retirement at the time, and so when jobs away from the base or anything came up, it was good for me to get to know the area and go out.
I understand.
Yeah, well. But we did ordnance safety, some demolition. I think our range was limited to 25 pounds. And it was too crowded there to really get an area where you could crank off anything significant.
Yeah.
And we were also the 3rd Naval District diving and demolition support team. And 3rd Naval District at the time, I think, was just New York and New Jersey. And so we used to get a lot of calls to support the state police or city police. Most communities did not have bomb squads. You know, like now everybody's got one because they're all worried. But they could rely on the military. Usually the Army was first call.
Yeah.
But if there was water involved, then we'd get the call, even referred to by the Army. The Army would certainly turn over something reluctantly to us. And so, yeah, we found murder weapons, we found bodies, we found vehicles that they've dumped off the end of a pier, and those sorts of things. But they did have a couple of events there. One was it was about 1964. It was an Eastern Airlines aircraft coming out of New York. They were, and they thought that they were on a course to collide with the incoming aircraft, and it turned out they weren't. It was a pilot error.
Yeah.
And he went over, lost control, and went into the water. It was right near Jones Beach. And it was sort of winter time, maybe fall, something like that. But cold water, so we went out the first night, and just debris, and we found a couple bodies and brought those in. The next day, they brought in the USS Tringa, which is a submarine submarine support ship, I guess. Mm-hmm. and because they don't have them anymore. But Tringa, it was a dive ship, and they could put dive stations on either side of their ship. That's how capable they were. And so us and several other dive communities, we all got together, and they spotted the crash and put out a 4-point moor, and then we started diving. And it wasn't all that rigorous for us. They had enough people where you had make a dive, and then and this was back into the hardhead again, Mark V. One of the few times we ever actually used it after school.
Yeah.
And so we brought it up. There were small pieces. There probably were the largest we found was a side piece with 2 windows, and it was probably the largest piece we found. But we were having trouble locating the engines, and we got out the what was that thing? The sonar. And it was a handheld sonar. Got down on the bottom and got a ping, swam out. We were in scuba for that one. Swam out, and there they were, all 4 in a row. Bing, bing,
Really?
bing. So they moved the ship up, got those. And it went on for a couple of weeks. There was that much debris scattered over probably half a mile by a quarter of a mile.
Wow, that's a big area.
Yeah, just small pieces. And they were putting it back together again in a hangar in New Jersey. They wanted to recreate the aircraft, I guess. And it would have been a real jigsaw puzzle, I'm sure.
Yeah. How deep was it about there?
Really, that was the saving grace. It was between, I think, 35 and 40 feet.
Okay, not too bad then.
Not too bad at all. Yeah. Well, it saved a lot on recompression time.
Yeah.
And if it had been, it wouldn't have been farther out. It would have been 100 feet deep, something like that. And it would have complicated, but we had enough people for a change out there that everything ran smoothly. And the skipper of the Tringa, I can't remember his name, but he was a diving background, LDO, lieutenant commander, and good guy, knew his business. He was really great. Then after that, I was getting near the end of my tour, and they came up in Washington, D.C. With this clever method of getting rid of excess ammunition. And all the ammunition depots, I guess countrywide, were just stocked full of ammunition that they didn't need anymore. They would develop a new weapon system, and of course the old weapon system had tons of ammunition, because if you're going to go to war and you're going to take this item, you need a lot of ammunition. So the magazines were just clogged with it. Yeah. And at one time the Navy had a dump ship. It was an LST, the Calhoun County. I remember that because the warrant officer I worked for at one time had been the gunner on that ship, and that's what they did. They went from port to port where magazines were located and picked up the excess and just took it out into a area that was authorized by the Navy at the time, probably is not anymore, and would dump it. But there was so much of it that in Washington, I think in Buord, the scientists there decided that they would take Liberty ships, which there was hundreds of them left over from World War II. And Liberty ship is just, they could make them in a day. Steel, 3 holds, and in the center, almost like a column, would be the engineering room, then places for the crew to sleep, berthing areas, then a mess hall, then the bridge, and it was all in a column, and the rest of it was open space, and they would load them up and try to get them over to Britain, but they were being torpedoed left and right. You go back through the history of that one, and there's even a true story of the being torpedoed off and the ships burning off the offshore here in Virginia Beach.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it was really terrible, and they tried escorts and so on, but nothing was foolproof. It helped. They had aircraft squadrons, blimps that could go out on station and look for submarines and so on, but still they were losing a lot of the Liberty ships at the time. So anyway, they pulled one of these ships out and they brought it into the pier at Earl, New Jersey. And so Lieutenant Banaski again said, I probably needed the experience of taking over this project.
Yeah.
And so I did. And it was called Chase 3. Chase being, and I didn't make this up, chase being cut holes and sink them. I know.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and 3. So actually there were 12, but 1, 2, and 3. 1 and 2 had been on the West Coast. I don't recall exactly which one of them. 1 or 2 blew up, and they didn't know why. So, this is not good.
Huh.
So they try it again with 2. 2 went down and went about halfway to the bottom and started to drift, full of unserviceable ammunition. Coast Guard is going nuts at that time, and it's too deep to really do very much about it, but still it's moving with the current. And then finally, a big air bubble came up and it settled down, but not in the place that they actually wanted it. So Chase 3 was to get around those 2 problems, was put it down and purposely blow it up this time. So I got the blow it up part, and they the Washington people set out the requirements for modifying the hull, and while it was empty, the people at Earl cut holes in the side, which would then be below the water line when the ship was loaded. Cut holes in the side and put in valves with reach rods to the main deck. And then we devised a explosive charge, and we used what they wanted. The requirement was to have it go down in a designated area, and at 1,000 feet, blow it up, complete, take it out.
Yeah.
And that way, knowing the time, the depth, and approximately how much the explosive charge was, that they could then calibrate all the seismic instruments on the East Coast.
Yeah.
So, well, what you're doing is getting rid of ammunition and then having a purpose.
Right.
Which the other 2 had no purpose.
Yeah.
What?
Makes sense.
Yeah, who needs a purpose?
Right.
So the device we got to detonate it at 1,000 feet was SOFAR bomb, sound frequency and ranging, and it's a device that's used by submarine hunters, aircraft.
Okay.
And if they spot a suspected submarine, they drop these SOFAR bombs down and they ping off of them, and then they get a signal and so on. And so, but they had settings that you could dial in and set it for some depth. We picked 1,000 feet. And so I had holes cut at the very bottom in the sides and we put blanking plates on it. But near that hole, I had Mark 6 depth charges placed, and they didn't have the mechanisms in them, and so it was just the tube. So I could reach through and put SOFAR bombs in those cavities, and one on either side of the engine room. And then we put the blanking off plates on. They wanted those. I didn't think it made much difference. So anyway, they loaded up the ship, and they calculated. I have a few pictures of it still. Just deck after deck of torpedo warheads, Mark 6 mine warheads, the old Mark 36 mine cases, ground mines. Just it was all just stacked in there, and so anyway, came the day they had a fleet tug, and we went aboard it, and we towed the ship out. It was good weather, and we towed the ship out to just offshore Virginia Beach here, wherever they had, I think, 1,200 or 1,300 feet of water.
Yeah.
And so I had asked that they put Jacob's ladders on either side, one on each side, so we could get on up. They didn't do that. The guy coordinating the changes down on the pier decided he'd go off on his own, and so on one side he took scrap metal and welded it to the side of the ship, and this would be adequate for us to climb up on it. So anyway, we get out to the dump area, and the tug just drops the tow. And so all we had was the IBS issue with the 10-horse motor.
Yeah.
And three of us had a chief by the name of Curtis, a great guy, chief mineman, and I can picture the third guy, but I can't remember his name. But anyway, we chugged on over to the ship, and so it had started to drift, and the wind was blowing it, and the ladder was on the side where the ship is bearing, the leeward side where the ship is bearing down on us.
Yeah.
And so you're climbing up at an angle to get on board. So we did. At the last minute, there was a civilian, and he had something to do with some equipment that he wanted. It was they were going to track something to do with the sinking of this thing or the detonation of it. I'm not sure. But anyway, he wanted to go aboard and make sure that it was installed properly, because they had installed it at the at Earl, New Jersey, alongside the pier. He wanted to make sure it was right. So we had four of us going over there in this boat. So get over there and tie up, and we're getting some wave action, and of course the angle, and climb up on there, and the guy runs up to the bow. He looks at this device he's got attached to it. Then he comes back and said, "I'm done. I need to go back to the ship." Well, if you looked at his eyes, you saw it was kind of panic-stricken.
Yeah.
So I couldn't leave just one guy there. So I left the two guys there, took him back to the ship and dumped him off. Then I went back by myself in the rubber boat, and came up underneath of one of the sides of the ladder, the steel ladder that they had installed, punched a hole in the bow of the rubber boat.
Oh, no.
Yes. Well, that's what I said, too.
Yeah.
So climbed back aboard, and I didn't tell everybody right away. So let's get this going. And so we had a wait time, and they had Life magazine for old people who remember that. No, it hasn't been around for a long time. But anyway, Life magazine had rented an aircraft, and they were going to fly over the area when we sunk the ship, and they'd linger until it went off, and then they'd get a article for the magazine. And because the sinking time, the PhDs had calculated was 3 hours and 40 some minutes once you opened the valves.
Yeah.
And so anyway, time came for us to do the job. So I went up and opened the valves, and the first thing that happened was the bow dropped, and so it was visibly sinking while we were still opening the last couple of valves.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Well, I think the PhDs had misplaced a decimal point somewhere. But so anyway, we had already gone down. I'd gone down and taken the blanking off plates off and put the SOFAR bombs in. So we were all set there. Didn't have to do much more. So then I announced to the guys about the boat. So the ship is sinking faster and faster, and now we got half a boat and a 10-horse motor. That gets worse. So the CO of the tug has got his bullhorn out, and he's saying expedite, expedite, with a 10-horse motor and half a boat. So I'm expediting as fast as I possibly can. So we finally get over the side of the ship, and they pull us off, and they get the boat out and all that. And he is going away at flank speed for an ocean tug, which is not all that much. But he's scared to death. But anyway, by then you look back over your shoulder, and that ship is going. It is leaving. And so we get back aboard, and they go away. They pull out and get some distance between it and where the ship's going down. And just a few minutes later, plunk, it's out of sight and down. And about less than a minute later, bang, it all went.
Wow.
And, a huge water spout and a lot of noise. And it was calculated at 4,031 ton of excess ammunition was on board. So not a bad demo shot.
Yeah,
that was my personal best.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's funny. That shows you can plan as much as you want, but Murphy sneaks in there and one thing after another.
Murphy was my fourth man.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. Oh, well. Well, not much you can do. You can't close the valves.
Yeah, yeah.
No, you're in.
Yeah. Well, once you start that process, you got to finish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did Life magazine get their picture?
No.
No.
They never got off the ground.
Well, oh well.
Well. So anyway, I went to Washington for the wrap up of this. They were planning then Chase 4 and onward, which they did. I don't think they tried to purposely blow it up after that.
Yeah.
I think they were getting flack from the green people.
Yeah.
Did you kill any fish? I don't think so. You know.
Yeah.
I think they were all the fish were somewhere else. So anyway, went to Washington and listened to the explanation about why the ship sank faster than they had figured out, and they never would point at it. I asked who was the guy that come up with that calculation, and they mumbled, and I never did find out. But anyway, that meeting wasn't going anywhere, so I decided to visit my detailer, and I was still JG, and so I went in to see the guy, and he's all harried, as detailers are. They get crazy. And he said, I'm busy. I don't have much time to talk. I'm looking for ensign or JG, LDO to go to Saigon. And all I said, whoop. Where? He said, Saigon. I said, no. Sounds good. Write me in. Well, my time was almost up. They didn't need a relief. They had Lieutenant Benaski there to do whatever. And so that was a good thing. So 10 days later, I was in Saigon.
Wow, that's quick.
Fast.
Yeah.
For some reason, that's what they wanted. And it was headquarters support activity, Saigon. And there was, at the time, about 20,000 people in Vietnam, and they were mostly special forces, helicopters to move them around, and some advisors, Navy advisors that were working on the river boats that the Vietnamese had, mostly left over from the French. They were fongs, they called them. We set up we called it the Saigon Bomb Squad, and from day one, I was the last person in, and they had been there a couple of months, and there was a lieutenant there by the name of Terry Burke, good guy, and I was the second officer, so there was 2 officers and 4 enlisted was the Saigon Bomb Squad. So we got a lot of calls. Some of them the real thing. Some others is somebody just thought that, some second lieutenant thought he was important enough to be bombed, and they're going to take it, kill him in his Jeep or something.
Yeah.
So anyway, but there was a lot of Viet Cong activity. They had declared that they were going to set off a bomb every day, and they did at certain things. They had attacked the U.S. Embassy, and they left behind explosive devices, which turned out to be their pattern. They attacked the Mekong floating restaurant, which was down on the pier in Saigon, just off of the pier, or wharf, I guess it was. We got 2 Claymore mines left over from that. It was a very brutal attack. They had fired 2 homemade Claymore mines. The homemade Claymore mines were about the size of a large pizza.
Wow.
And they had taken reinforcing rebar, and cut it into maybe 3/4 inch pieces, and then placed it very deliberately in a matrix. Or had placed them and then poured a matrix over it, and then a metal cover over the top of that, and sat on a stand, and or not. And so there was 2 of those, and they were attached to timers, and got plenty of time on those, so we got rid of those. They had a Vietnamese police graduation And after the ceremony, they were marching them down the stairway, like in an arena. You know how they have the wide stairways. They were marching these brand new police officers down the stairway, and they fired a claymore up the stairway and killed a bunch of those.
Yeah.
We responded to one at the airport, Tonsonhoot Airport, and I don't remember a device there. Then what was the hotel? There was a Metropole Hotel. They attacked it with guys on motorbikes and automatic weapons, and they fired at the front door, and there was a MP and a Vietnamese policeman on duty there, one on each side of the door. And it was all, they had taken this hotel over as a BEQ. And so they ran past this place and fired at everybody. And so they tended to duck behind a sandbag barricade. And then they drove a taxi cab in the lobby, and it was full of explosives, and it blew up. It blew the face off of that entire hotel, and injured a number of people, Americans. But the worst part that I saw was the across the street was Vietnamese housing. And they all got up when they heard the machine gun fire and stood by the glass windows.
Oh no!
And when it went off, and it was really a mess. I happened, as luck will have it, there was a ONI agent that had to get to the airport real early in the morning out to Tonsonhoot, but they didn't have the blast passes. They called them. It was a Vietnamese pass that you applied for, and they tried to keep the number down. Was you had to have a reason to be out after curfew.
Oh, okay.
So I had one of those, and it was actually they were our drinking buddies. But he said, "Well, I need to get down there early," and so I said, "Okay, I'll get up and take you down." So I dropped him off and was coming back, and I had the radio on. It was the MP frequency. And I heard the explosion, and then where it was, and so I headed on down that way, and so it was organized chaos. And finally, some MP come over, and he said, "There's an AWOL bag over here by this Jeep. You want to take a look at it?" I said, "Yeah." There's no reason for an AWOL bag to be behind or next to the tire of and it's facing down the street, where the reaction people are going to come by, because they were just showing up. And so anyway, went over there, and then they start getting sniper fire from down the street. And so the MPs are organized, so they went down there after that one. So I get over and unzip the bag, and I figure, well, the Jeep is pretty good, or the vehicle's a good place to be, because the sniper fire is coming from past that, the other direction.
Yeah.
So I unzipped the bag, and there's a Claymore mine in it, and so I cut the wires to the timer very quickly, and it was a wristwatch in a metal box. They had made a special metal box for this wristwatch timer with the leads coming out, and then it went down to the cap and all that. So I set it down, and then I checked underneath of it, good school procedure, check it all out, pulled it out, set it down, checked the bag, and I reached over and picked up the watch and put my light on it, and it was pegged. So I thought, well, they probably screwed this up. Mm-hmm. What I didn't know till actually years later, Dick Teal, one of the team members there, and Dick Teal had worked in the EOD business, in the commercial business. We ran into each other again there. long time EOD tech, good EOD tech. So he and another guy had taken this that day and wondered whether it would work or not. So they wound up the watch a little bit, put it out there. It worked.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I said. Wow.
Man.
So I don't, to this day, not for sure whether it was just, the guiding hand or what it was, but whatever. It didn't have much time to spare, I guess.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so, anyhow,
so back then when you went through school in 56, did they have like IEDs section? Did they talk about IEDs at that time? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they did. The IEDs at the time were things like kids taking, what was it? There was a hair cream and something else, and if you put it in an envelope and you mush it together, it'll create a heat. The kids were putting it into mail boxes, the stand-up, and burning up the mail. That was the big thing.
Okay.
It wasn't like the crazy guy out there. No, it wasn't anywhere near like it is today, or as we got into as the war went on and all of that.
Where did you? So for even, that the watch timer circuits and stuff. Where did you? As Vietnam War went on, did they start bringing that information back and giving updates on?
We stripped everything against all the rules.
Okay.
When you recovered a device, you stripped it.
Yeah.
And for a while, we could send things back pretty much almost by the mail.
Really?
There was no. They put it in a mail bag, put it on an airplane, and sent it to Hawaii, because Hawaii was just getting going with groups.
Okay.
They were just putting them together. They hadn't supplied any people yet. That was coming up.
Yeah.
And so we were getting everything that we could get our hands on, stripping it to where it was safe to mail, which sounds crazy, and getting it back. But then in country, as the war gets bigger, into the country comes an Army postal unit. And so then any packages you had to have a box and the wrapping if you needed it, and you took it down, but the box had to be open and they had to inspect it. Well, what we were sending to Hawaii was never going to get by.
Yeah.
You could tell them all day long, that you had made it safe, and you're not buying that one.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're kind of betwixt and between. But back in Hawaii, there was a friend of ours who was on Admiral McCain's aircraft, because he flew out of Barbers Point. His airplane was there. And so he learned about our problem with getting things back for training and all of that. And I don't know whether he brought it to the Admiral's attention or somebody else did, but Admiral McCain was not one to be dealt with. He chewing on a cigar and yelling at people, and had a corpsman that followed him because his blood pressure was so high. So it turned out he told somebody, he said, "You tell him to bring it down to our airplane, and I'll take it back, and nobody's going to tell me what I can put on my airplane." And so he became our gun runner.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and so he made a couple of trips, and one of them, the guys at the depot, or at the group, they were late, and so he waited a few minutes for them, and so that's how we were getting things back. But we had a museum of our own that we developed, and I saw more of that because, well, towards the end of my first tour, I had a thing I was working on go off, and so I got medevac, and was in Chelsea Naval Hospital, in and out of there for about almost a year. Then I got 2 years convalescent shore duty at Brunswick, Maine. Still had an EOD team up there, a couple guys, and we did mostly trips up to the Canadian border to pick up deserters who had run to Canada.
Oh, really?
But they ran in the summertime, and so they didn't bring their pea coat. And when it got cold, they wanted to surrender.
The cold is the great equalizer.
Yeah. Well, because I was the EOD officer, my primary duty, the captain came along. He had just relieved the security officer for some reason. And so he came along and said, I know what your primary duty is, but I'm going to give you a secondary duty, and that's going to be base security officer. I said, well, now I got 2 fire departments, structural and airfield, and a military police detachment, a civilian police detachment, a Marine detachment, because we got nuclear weapons on the base. So anyway, that was my collateral duty.
That's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, well, it turned, when I left there, I was there a couple of years, like 2 years to the day I left. But I got a really good fitness report from the guy.
Yeah?
Yeah, we got along good.
That's awesome.
I don't necessarily get along with people good. I try, though.
Yeah, that's what counts.
Yeah. So then comes orders. And now the groups are established, and everything's going along, I guess, as good as they're ever going to. And I got my orders and was back to the group. Went to refresher, and before I went, and during a refresher, this friend of mine calls from, he had left Indian Head and gone out to Hawaii ahead of me. And he called up and he said, I got some good news and I got some bad news. I said, oh, okay, well, good news first. And he said, well, I got the good job in Vietnam. I said, don't tell me the bad news.
Yeah.
So anyway, that got down to River Salt Flotilla 1, and actually a very good job. I mean, we were working. We were doing what I thought we were supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And we rode the boats. River Salt Flotilla 1 was a number of ships. Some of them converted LSTs, all painted green. And they had a couple of ships that were office facilities. They had the commander of the River Salt Flotilla. And it was a thing just put together. There was no assault flotilla until they decided to make Flotilla 1. Then they glued it together pretty good, brought it to Vietnam. And from the flotilla, which the bigger ships, like LST size, they're on the larger rivers, like the Saigon River, where it's harder to get at them, and plus they can't navigate down in the canals. And then they had a converted MCM, I think they were 6s, but they up-armored them, bar armor around the sides, and they put in a turret on each one of them. Some had 50 caliber machine gun. Other ones had grenade launchers. It looked like the one you sift flour with.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And you use a hand crank, and the grenades will go bing, bing, bing out there. Well, it worked.
That's awesome.
And those were the ones that would go down the canals. And the whole thing was to support the 9th Infantry, and specifically the 3rd Brigade of the 9th Infantry. And they were the ones that were designated to operate with the Navy. And so some of them were embarked in ships that went with the flotilla. And I don't remember now how many of them, maybe the whole brigade, which just seems like a lot of people. But anyway, they would develop a mission. It was going to be down a canal, and they would have 15 or 20 of these Mike 6s. Some of them were personnel carriers. They had seats in them, and they could take probably a full platoon of infantry that with their equipment and all that. They had a special boat with a howitzer. It came out of a tank, but a howitzer installed in it. So when that led it was a couple of boats back, but when it came around the corner and started firing howitzer rounds in, it usually shut things down. Then they had another one they called Zippo, and that was a flame boat or a flame.
Flamethrower?
Yeah, well, it was big. It came out of a tank again.
Oh, wow.
And it just sprayed fire all over the beach, and they were good. But for the most part, into the area, they had 2 boats. One was the aid boat, and it was empty, and the other one was just a minesweeping boat. And so we rode those rather than ride in back crowded with soldiers and so on. So we could ride up front. And if anything came up early on, we could get out of the boat and go do it. So the canals could get very narrow. Sometimes you had the brush and everything just flapping along the side of the boat. So it was very close. So the idea was that they would pick out a place that they wanted to go, and that's where they would start their operation, or until they were ambushed. And so those would come up every once in a while, probably about every 3rd time down there. And the ambush was usually automatic weapons and RPGs. And so then the first 8 or 10 boats would run through the ambush and turn in and land the troops. The other ones would hold back, land the troops on the other side of the ambush, and then the boats that ran through it would then try to sweep through the ambush site and catch the guys or chase them into a blocking force on the other side.
Gotcha.
And so our boat would land, and then because these guys are spread out all over the place, we'd wait for a call. If they ran into landmines or booby traps or something like that, then you could find a specific unit to go to. But being with one unit, then trying to get to another one would have been almost impossible.
Yeah.
So we wait and get called out, and usually would happen. And sometimes you could just send 1 or 2 guys out, do whatever it was. Sometimes it was they thought there were landmines and there weren't, or a couple times they stepped on them and knew they were there, and we didn't go in and get the rest of them.
Yeah.
But it was very good. So after 6 months, I got relieved. I was going to go back and be the XO of mobile unit. and my relief came in, and so everything's running along pretty well, and I'm happy in Hawaii. And a couple of months later, he gets hit, and so looking around, we've deployed about everybody we can find, and so they said we need a lieutenant, because by then we had 4 teams in the mobile riverine. The ship I was on, we had another team, and we had 2 more with a branch of the mobile riverine that was working up closer to the border. So there's 2 teams there, and they were all ensigns or warrant officers or JGs. So they wanted a lieutenant in there, I guess, take the blame. And so I went back in, and I thought, well, I'm going to just finish up this guy's tour. He had 3 months to go. And they said, no, it's a deployment, 6 months. What are you thinking about?
Jeez.
Said, okay. So anyway, finished that 6 months up, and that was that was good. Had good OpCon, had good relations with a couple of minor problems, but one of them was the diving world, the salvage world had smaller craft. They were LCC something or another, but they were small, and they could supported a small diving operation, and they had an A-frame up on the bow to lift, and they got mined. One night, guy swam up, put a mine on the stern, knocked it, and it flipped it over, and it landed. The stern was in good shape, but the rest of it was out of the water, held up by this A-frame. And so they wanted to get rid of it quick because it was a hazard of navigation, and it would cut down the maneuverability that they had if it was to remain. So we run over there with all of our explosives, and again, it was close to the beach, and we started taking rifle fire from there. I had an Australian guy exchanged. We used to, between the Australians that were over on the shoreline, what was the place? Anyway, we would change guys off. One of our guys would go there, and one of theirs would come down. And the Australians were absolutely great. They were gunners. They were ready to do trigger time. And so he was the first one that was off that boat, and he was running in there, and he thought he was going to get the guy, but he did chase him. And so that went along pretty well. And so we placed the explosives. But in the meantime, one of my guys goes down, and he gets in the cabin of this salvage craft, and he takes the steering wheel off. And so we brought it up and said, oh, okay. Well, when we got back, put it proudly on our hooch.
Yeah.
And so it blew it, and we sunk it, and then they ran to make sure they ran something over the top so they could tell what the depth was, and they had the depth they wanted over the top of it. I don't remember all the details of it, but we had a little problem with one of their officers that came over, and he wanted the wheel back, and said, you know, if you had gone down and got it, you could have it.
Yeah.
And so, that got bad, but it worked out okay. And
Nice.
So anyway, we kept the wheel. But
That's awesome.
yeah, well, they were, I don't know.
Special.
Yeah. But so anyway, I went back to EOD Group 1, and I was going to be the XO of the mobile unit. Then the president decided that we've had enough of Vietnam. This is years into this thing, and so he wanted to Vietnamize the war, which means turn your stuff over to them and let's get out of here.
Oh, yeah.
And so the Vietnamese did not have very good EOD Navy capability. And so they were looking for somebody that had some experience in Vietnam that could help set up this thing. And there we go again. And so I came in as chief and another guy that had been in training. And so we came in and spent 6 months setting this up. They did have a couple of people that were really good. They helped us with recruiting. We set up a school at Catlai. I don't remember, Catlai. It was on the coast and relatively safe out of the mainstream of the war. And so 6 months was over, and so I was going to go back and be the XO of the mobile unit some more. And so then the guy that relieved me went to a meeting in Saigon and got a hold of some of the Vietnamese bossy day and created an international incident. And they relieved him for cause and started looking around for another lieutenant to come in and do this thing. And so I went back for another 6 months.
Jeez.
And again, it was pretty good job. Actually, I had good opcons and cooperation. It was a little hard dealing with the initially with the Vietnamese, getting them to do the things that we do. Preventative maintenance was always one that was a real thriller with them. The first time I tried it was with an air compressor, and I was telling the Vietnamese chief that you had to change it took a special oil, and you had to change that oil periodically and so on. So he stopped it all, and he said, "No broke." I said, "Yeah, but if you do this, it won't break." I said, "No broke." So we worked that one out.
That's funny.
Yeah, well, he wanted to wait till something flew off the end of it.
Yeah.
Then you could fix it. But anyway, it was things like that. And so then we took them, some of them down to the Delta. We tried to stick them in where there was some war. And they were good. Yeah, they worked out pretty well. In fact, a lot of them are here. My wife and I are going on a cruise on the Columbia and Snake River. That's the Lewis and Clark route, and it separates Washington and Oregon, all that. And we're going on that cruise this month. And in fact, we're going to have dinner with a couple of the Vietnamese who are in Portland.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, we've kept in touch, and so they've come to some of our reunions. There was one of our EOD guys here, retired, died here a couple of weeks ago. We went to the funeral this last weekend, and there were some of the Vietnamese there that he had been the advisor to. So we kept in touch all these years, and never lost it. We did it a little bit different. some of the advisory units had set up little Americas. There would be huts only for the Americans with a big fence around it. We decided not to do that. Is that move in?
Yeah.
Go live with them.
Yeah.
And because to be very honest, I don't think many of us knew exactly what it was we were doing. Just kind of played it by hand. The school, the training was pretty well laid out. We knew there was a curriculum and what we were going to do with them and all that. So that went pretty well. But other than that, things were pretty loose.
Yeah, just kind of given to you guys to figure out the best way to execute things.
Mm-hmm.
There's goods and bads with that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And so anyway, that was the second trip there. And so went back to Hawaii. Well, I made lieutenant commander in country. I made lieutenant and lieutenant commander in country. So war can last a long time.
Yeah.
So anyway, I go back to Hawaii, but I'm not going to be XO of the unit. So I got the CO of the shipboard unit. And you talk to EOD guys now, and they've never heard of it. Well, it didn't last very long because it did have a lot to do with the same things mobile unit was doing. But when they set up the group, they wanted, in order to have a larger, I guess, footprint, they wanted the staff to govern more than just 2 other units. So they set the mobile unit, the shipboard unit, and the training unit. And the first person to have command of the shipboard unit, they made it an officer in charge. And so he ran out his time. When I relieved him, my orders read commanding officer. So there was quite a difference. Well, what it turns out to be was the last few months that I had that command, we worked with the mobile unit to just move everything over to them, and they would take up the responsibilities that we had, which was to keep teams on aircraft carriers, ammunition ships, or special operations. And special operations were things like moving chemical munitions out of the Philippines to Johnson Island, or I don't know, a couple other things. We had the agency came to us there at one time, and they had an operation that turned out to be the Glomar Explorer, Glomar Challenger, the one that the ship that went out and recovered half of the Russian submarine.
Yeah.
And so they wanted a dive team out there, and actually it was Don Ashby, the gentleman that just passed away, that we went to the funeral over the weekend. He was our selection. We sent him. We had enough time. It wasn't like, gotta go do it today like everything else.
Yeah.
So we sent him to dive school, and then told him what the what the job was going
Smart.
to be. Yeah, well, yeah. So it was things like that, but it was things the mobile unit really could have done. But the mobile unit liked it. They had they didn't have to keep providing people to aircraft carriers. They could take care of these on-call missions to different places. They could run through the Pacific to all these places that still had unexploded ammunition from World War II.
Yeah.
And take care of that. And so parachuting was just coming in to the units then. And I think we were parachuting before it was actually authorized. In fact, I'm sure it was, because Bill Cato, who at one time was in the Pentagon, and I relieved him in the Pentagon, and he had drawn up all the paperwork, and it just wasn't there for the final signatures on it. We still had places to go to get approval. That's the Pentagon game, is running around with a piece of paper in your hand. And so I finally got it approved, but I didn't do the work. He did. Bill K, he had a couple of things there. And so we finally got parachuting authorized. But we sent some people to jump school in Fort Bragg. We sent people to the Navy, Lakehurst, New Jersey. We brought a parachute instructor out to Hawaii. Had a training class out there.
Really?
Jumped, yeah.
That's awesome.
And I was the CO, but I had to go to, we were under special warfare at the time, and they wanted one of the COs to be TAD to their staff and for 30 days at a time. So I went there, and the guy said, I understand the EOD guys are jumping. I don't see any wings on you yet. I said, no, I couldn't find time. He said, we'll send you over to El Centro. You ready to jump 5 times? And I said, yeah. So I did. Drove out there one morning and was there on time and made 5 jumps, got my kitty wings. And
all on the same day?
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so drove back. Yeah, well, it wasn't like you get, weeks to do this.
Yeah.
And no, they were geared up, and evidently they called it the gentleman's course.
Yeah.
It's 3 weeks at Fort Bragg, or 1 day at El Centro. And so the other 5 jumps to get the Navy wings we made in Hawaii. And,
okay.
They set up an ad hoc way to do things, and of course then they started jumping over here on the East Coast too. I don't remember now when that was. I wasn't involved in that at all.
What planes did you guys jump out of back
Anything
then?
we could get.
Really? Just whatever was available?
Whatever Navy plane happened, whatever pilot you could talk into it.
Yeah.
There was somewhere on the island that you could request. It was a formal request to support a parachute training activity, and they would provide a helicopter, usually the big Jolly Green Giants, the bigger helicopter.
Oh, yeah.
And then we got permission to use, what was it? What were they growing there? But anyway, it was the field, what they were growing, they could only grow 1 crop, and then they had to let the field rest for one, but they plowed it up. And so it made a perfect drop zone.
Yeah. And
got permission to use that. But we had a number of problems. Fortunately, didn't kill anybody, but the learning experience was a learning experience, and there were a number of problems with it, and a lot of reluctance to ever get involved in it too. Was that the Commodores were always questioning, why do you need this, and so on. And how much is it going to cost? Was really
that part never changes, right?
coming out his stash of money.
What was the initial reason that they gave for starting up a jump program?
The main excuse was you have a ship at sea, and the ship experiences a fire or some other calamity, and it involves a nuclear weapon.
Okay.
So you're not going to be allowed into any port in the world. They don't want you. You got to resolve your problem while you're out there.
Yeah.
If you can. So then you load up your jumpers, and we developed a a boat on a sled, another rubber boat.
Your nemesis.
Yeah, I am. And you shove the boat out, then follow it out, 4 people, ideally. And the boat's loaded with the equipment. It lands, that parachute comes off. Your jumpers all go into get in the boat, go over to the ship that has the problem, resolve the problem, and then ride the ship back into a port. And so if they convinced them of anything else, later on, that capability came in pretty handy, was the more recent teams in Iraq made a combat jump, actually, with the Rangers.
Yeah.
And the Rangers needed EOD people to go in because they were going in on the oil wells up in the north.
Right.
And it was reported that the oil wells had been mined. So get some EOD guys, and the Army didn't have any at the time. And so Navy said, sure, we can do that. Combat jump. Boy, that sounds like more
I'll
fun
take it. Yeah.
than just the regular jumping.
Exactly.
So anyway, I don't know how all that worked out, whether they ran into anything on the ground or not. I've never talked to anybody that actually did it.
Yeah.
And you talk to anybody else, and EOD people, I knew some that actually lied.
Yeah. That never happens.
Yeah. Yeah, the water was deeper, the sharks were bigger.
Exactly.
So, anyway, where am I? Well, anyway, I had the shipboard unit, and got relieved. That was my command. Thought, well, that's pretty good. So the next duty station I had was the experimental diving unit. I would have liked another command, but experimental diving unit's not bad either. So went there, and I was the project manager and test subject.
Yeah.
For all of that. And believe it or not, they were still working on the Mark 16.
Really?
And we tested the prototypes. We had 3 prototypes of things. Westinghouse provided one. I don't remember who the other 2 were, but they all provided their version of what the Mark 16 should look like. And mostly the trouble was with the canister that had the scrubber in it that took the CO2 out of your breathing air. And we had tunnels. In fact, we deployed to San Juan. Well, what they did was in the fall, they decided that they had tests that they needed to do in the north, and so they'd go with the Canadians for the winter. Bad idea. Or you could take your project and go to Puerto Rico.
I might choose that one.
There we go. And so we're diving that, and had a few problems and rode them up. And we out of time?
No, not at all.
And so worked on that, and then Bill Kadow was the only rep that we had in the Pentagon, and he was commander and made captain. And so he was looking for relief so he could go take command of something else. He wanted to get out of the Pentagon. But he had done a lot of work. He had laid the groundwork for a lot of things that needed to be done. And some of them were still on his desk almost complete.
Really?
Just really good shape. And so my first month, I relieved him. I got pulled up from the experimental diving unit to Pentagon. But my first month there was running around with the papers that he had and finally getting them approved, which this was the first time that we had 4 men assigned to a diving team. The teams used to be an officer and 2 enlisted.
Really?
And well, and if you read the diving manual, which a lot of people just, what for? If you read it, it would tell you that you can't do that with 3 people or 2 people or by yourself and all of that.
Yep.
And so finally got a 4th EOD tech into each deployed team. And so that worked out good. A lot of just technical things that needed taken care of. Parachuting was authorized. But anyway, the job in the Pentagon was interesting. Had all the money, and that was very good. And towards the end of the fiscal year, we got more money. Our program was so small; it was the first program that they made joint service, and they had a single service manager for it, an admiral, and they picked EOD because it was small. It was easier to see how all this was going to work out. Army units, Marine units, Air Force unit, all this came together. So all that came to our office, but each one of those services had a rep. So that was really pretty easy to deal with. And we had all of the money for training and equipment development. So that was the EOD facility and the EOD school. And towards the end of the year, though, because we were so small, they declared our budget was the value of it was somewhere to the right of the decimal point. It just wasn't much money.
Really?
Well, it kept people from stealing it because it never solved anybody's problem.
Yeah.
And so they left it alone. And that was a big deal in the Pentagon. Suddenly your men and money would disappear off the system. And then you have to go tell the admiral run down the hallway and get it put back in. Oh, that happened a couple of times. Yeah. And so towards the end of the year, people who couldn't spend all of their money would come in and say, "Could you use $1 million?" I said, oh yeah, I imagine. God. But the group commanders called both of them and said, get a want list because this is going to be very short notice. So sometimes on the eve of the end of the year, they were still putting stuff in and getting that year's money because it disappears into something. But anyway, and so we dealt a lot with ABCA 5, the agreements with America, Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, NATO. For a number of agreements, I was designated the U.S. representative, and so get to go to all these things.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was, and you wear your good clothes.
Yeah.
And we had the CO of the school at the time was a commander by the name of Dave Shibley. And Dave and I had run into each other over the years. He was a submariner during World War II. Then he was a frogman, and a very memorable frogman. Then he got into EOD. He was all over the place, but just really a great person. And so somehow or another, we were building an EOD school in England, and they were building it, we were paying for it. And so we would go to, because he was had the school and I had the money, we would go to England about once every month or so and go see this Lodge Hill Camp School and see how they were doing it and so on. It was really a good reason to go to England.
Yeah.
And but anyway, it was things like that. And then 2 years, I think 2 years or more, I was up there. Then I got screened and selected to go to EOD Group 2. I was still lieutenant commander, and got down to EOD Group 2 as the chief staff officer. And I think the day I got there, I got notified that I'd been selected for commander.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that was my last tour in the Navy. I retired in July '79, and my wife and I had, I was still operating on the education that I came in the Navy with.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering.
I know.
Yeah, because how'd that work?
If you run around the world doing stupid things, and people forgive you for your education.
Right. That when you made ensign, did you put in for the LDO program? Is that
yes?
How you made? Okay.
No, actually, I put in for warrant officer.
Okay.
And that year they did away with warrant officers, and I thought, well, my request or my application was dead. I mean, they just weren't making them anymore.
Yeah.
And so they just moved it all over to the ensign category.
Oh, okay.
I picked for ensign.
Nice.
Yeah.
That works.
Yep. Well, again, lucky will help you out when you can't do anything else.
Yeah, exactly.
But, I went to Old Dominion, got a degree in management, and then another one, but got an MBA. And then I still had 2 young kids. I wanted to get back in the EOD thing, commercial side of it, which was just coming up. There was only 1 or 2 companies at the time that were doing commercial EOD work.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to do that, get in the beginning. But young kids, and I'd been away enough, and so I took a job for about 10 years being an administrator for law firms.
Okay.
And that's not anything you want to do forever, but got them, to where they were pretty much on their own, and then it was get back in the business and all of that. The law firms, the administrator runs everything except law.
Yeah.
And because the lawyers want to get rid of it all, and so the younger lawyers were easier. I just corral them with, here's what I want you to do, and I want you to do it now.
That's awesome. They just accept it.
If they thought I would harm them, I thought that was a positive sort of thing.
I love it.
But anyway, I finally gave that up, and I went back to UXO companies. And UXO companies, their job, for those that haven't been involved with it, there's still, was it 1 million acres or more of land in the United States contaminated by unexploded ammunition.
Yeah.
That's the Corps of Engineers study that they put out. So maybe it's more now. I've been away from it for a while. But there's places that, for example, especially in the South, because the weather was better for training than it was, in Minnesota or somewhere, And so a lot of places in the South, and for example, they'd go in a vacant lot, and they would make a camp, and they would fire artillery as part of their training, and there was no requirement for them to clean it up. They fired it, and it's gone. And so when they wanted to use that area for something else, either develop it or just clean it up, they would hire companies, these newly found companies, to come in and find it and get rid of it. So that was generally what it was all about. The one thing that the government to this day does not want to talk about is the unexploded ammunition that's still in the water.
Yeah. It makes sense, because if they start talking about it, it sounds like there's a lot of it.
There is. And for example, the range that they've got down in Puerto Rico, the area up to 40 feet deep is littered with 2,000-pound bombs.
Yeah.
They're all over the place.
Wow.
And so I have, pictures of those. Kahalavi, the place that they've spent millions of dollars cleaning out in Hawaii, that you get offshore, and again, it's loaded. But we're not going to tell anybody. Out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
Which is deep water dump.
Yeah, right.
And I guess the green people, the green agenda, has pretty much outlawed that anymore, as you can't dump it at sea. You can't. I don't know what you do with it.
There's all kinds of rules with it now.
Yeah, it's break it up in small pieces and eat it.
Yeah.
But I worked for a couple of companies, UXO company. The best one I worked for anyway was ECC. But working for UXO, went to Bosnia for a year, and that was all mine clearance. And the Red Cross said that when the war started, Bosnia made mines. And they would sell them at international ordnance shows or armament shows and stuff. These places you can go, you buy a tank, or buy 20 of them, or airplanes, but mines too. So they had a variety of mines, and so they didn't need to go out and get any from anybody else, and which was pretty good. We knew what we were dealing with.
Yeah.
And so it was all mine clearance, and it was in support of construction companies that were going to go in and clear places like power plants, water treatment plants. We cleared the right-of-way for power lines. We cleared schoolyards. A lot of things. But the Red Cross said that at the beginning of the war there were 11 million mines in the inventory, and at the end, or when they said they stopped, there were none.
Wow.
So they were scattered around.
Yeah.
They put them in really insidious places. It was on the side of roads where people walk, to stay off the highways and stuff like that. But especially where units, either the Croats or the Serbs or the Bosnians, there's 3 warring factions, and they did not get along, and so all 3 were each one had 2 enemies, and so you couldn't get anything done from one area to another. They all either would help you or they wouldn't help you. They'd leave things alone. Dayton Accord said that the military for those 3 had to go out and recover their mines that they put in. If they knew, they should have put that in there. because they did a lot of scattering of small mines, and nobody, they didn't know where they were. So they would work 3 days a week for the Dayton Accord people. Then they would work for us for another 3 days, and commercially, and we paid them. We had approval to hire. We hired the Croatian Army unit, the Croatian Army engineers, and they were very good. And so one of the places we worked the longest was where they had been in position, two warring factions facing each other, probably 50 yards apart in trenches for 3 or 4 years. What was it?
Wow.
And so they just fought back and forth for all this time. Nobody moved, except there were stories about guys coming out of the trench, crawling into the minefield that separated them, and moving the mines around. Or putting more tripwires on the other guy's mines.
Yeah.
And it went on and on. But some of the things that we found out there were just nightmares. Is why in the world would anybody do that? And so it was kind of a crazy deal. Yeah. And a couple times we went in after a body. Guy goes in. They wanted to get mines and get the explosive out for fishing. It's a DuPont lure.
Yep.
And so they crawl in, and they thought they knew where the mines were and didn't. And so they get, and then so they go get him. And but that's a little bit harder than it sounds. You still have to probe your way in and so on. The complication came with usually you can use an ordnance locator and pick up the ping on it. Except they had one version of the mines was in a wooden box, and the only metal in it was about the size of half the size of a watch pin.
Really?
As a firing pin. And so they were a little harder if I had to probe for them.
Yeah.
And that slowed things down. And of course, the people paying the bill was, well, can't you do this faster? I said, no.
Nope. It's funny. Whenever money comes into it, people always want it faster, and they don't necessarily think about what you have to go through.
Yeah.
I would like to come back after this job, so I'm going to keep going the pace I'm going.
That was a strong motive.
Yeah.
But so a year there, that was good. At the end of it, a lot of the shooting had slowed down. I guess they just got tired of each other, and they had put together a governing organization with all three parties, and that had to be a nightmare. But it slowed things down, and then they had an American come over and talk them into stopping the fighting, and they declared it the zone of separation, and it's a zigzag line. It's where the fighting stopped that day.
Gotcha.
And so anyway, so I brought my wife over, and she went into Zagreb, and I picked her up there, and then we drove down through the war zone. I had an apartment in Sarajevo, so we stayed there a couple of days, then went crossed over to Split, and then went down to Dubrovnik.
Yeah.
And if you haven't been there, you ought to go see that. That's really something. It's a great place, good water. So we went down there, spent a few days, and came back up, and we went home. So then went to Iraq. That was less fun than it was first thought to be.
Really?
And, well, you couldn't get out and drive around.
Yeah.
You had to go, best way was 4-truck convoy if you were going to move anywhere, and guns.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of guns. Yeah, if you know a guy with a gun, tell him to go get another gun and go get some guys that have got 2 guns. Yeah, and so most of that there was less mines than it was just Saddam's excess ammunition. He bought ammunition for weapons he didn't have.
Really?
Yeah, we found tons and tons of it. The base that we were at was based around 50 concrete magazines built by the Germans some other time. Better magazines than I ever had as an ordnance officer anywhere I'd ever been.
Really?
They were perfect. And so we were bringing in ammunition, truckloads of it day and night, and storing it in the magazines. We had a ammunition specialist that the Corps of Engineers gave us, and he was the authority on storing it. We stored it as you would in a U.S. magazine area, which was fine. Because a lot of foreign ammunition, you never really knew what it was going to do, especially with things like white phosphorus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we had that, and then we were getting overloaded, so we got all these magazines were full of one thing or another. And they were still bringing it in. We got permission for open storage. We ran a demolition area, and the requirement in the contract was to shoot 100 ton a day, and it was easy. It was there.
Awesome. Yeah.
And it wasn't all that dangerous other than manufacturing flaws or something like that. And so it was a matter of just getting it out. And we used to start at 3 o'clock in the morning when it was cooler, and get 100 ton out there, and then sometime around 10 o'clock in the morning or so to shoot, and then start getting things ready for the next day, but taking a siesta during the heat of the day. As I was over there in the summertime, you get 120 degrees, and it's not too bad after you've been there a while, but when you're the first day at 120 degrees is just, I mean, it takes you to the ground.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we carried, each vehicle had 2 cases of water in it, and 2 cases of rations. Because you all of a sudden, clear skies, then you get a dust storm, and dust storm just shuts you down. So just stop. Don't try to go, even turn around and go back.
Yeah.
You can't do it. And then you wait for it to be over with, and then go on with what it is you're doing. But yeah, 100 ton a day, every day, and that worked out pretty good. We hired 100 Iraqis every day, and these were certified by the sheikh that was in the town, and he's the only guy that he controls them.
Yeah.
So we paid them, they paid him, all that sort of thing. And then we had a special forces guy, retired, and he had a system where they, instead of fingerprints and all that, they did the eye.
The retina?
I forget what you call it, but they take a picture of the eye, and they can identify the person by that. It's almost like a eye print.
Yeah.
That's not it. But so we kept track of. We were always leery of them sneaking a couple guys in, because at night we had people in the wire, and then everybody go to the berm and get ready. And so you get harassing sort of things.
Gotcha.
Was that before all of these companies came in blowing up these stashes of weapons that were all over the place. They could go in, pick up a bomb that they could carry, and then use it on a roadside booby trap and kill soldiers.
Yep.
So it's a bad idea. Well, once they figured out that we were getting rid of this stuff, I mean, really quickly, they weren't all that happy about it. And so and then they had a big explosion at a place called Karbala, which was religious. And that really got things going between the different groups of Iraqis. And so there was big interest in the kind of explosives that they used, and they thought they were homemade. Then Special Forces came in one time and said, we know where there's 4 or 6 drums of homemade explosives, and we don't want to move them. Will you guys come and get them? I said, yeah. So we did, and we opened one and took a look at it and thought, this is not a good idea. Took some samples and sealed it back up, and then I stored it way out in the desert. And so if anything happened to it, and so I kept it. The FBI wanted to keep it, and I offered to send them the stuff that I had, and they didn't want it. They had to have somebody come down and take the sample themselves. I said, okay, well, come on. And so I called them a couple times, and they said, yeah, well, we've got it on our list to do. And so it was real hot about 3 or 4 days in a row, and I decided I've had enough homemade explosives and all that. And so we blew it all up and made a big hole in the desert.
Nice.
Nobody ever know.
What years was that?
It was almost the turn of the century.
Okay.
I'm not good on years. It had to be before 2015 because that's when I retired.
Yeah.
I was 82.
Wow. You're doing the EOD thing for a long time then.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Dragging out a job.
Yeah. I mean, if you love it, you may as well.
Yeah.
That's great.
So spend some time in Afghanistan. That place is a nightmare. There's nothing you want to see there.
Yeah.
And that was bulk explosives, and they would hide it, and different organizations would find it, and so we got rid of it. A lot of it was going up in caves, and everything is either up or down in that country. And you go up to the top of a mountain, go down, and the people who live in the bottom of that one, they have their own community, and they run it. It's perfect. They run their own thing. And you go up over the next one, and there's another group, and they run theirs. They don't care about what's going on in the capital or anywhere else. They run what they run.
Yeah.
And so we're down to Kandahar, and the company had a job of building from Kandahar forts, small forts out near the border with Pakistan, and so we go out, check the areas there, see if there was anything, and then they'd go ahead and build these small forts. Which I thought, nobody wants to be here. Nobody ought to be here. And so they'd send infantry out. But anyway, those were good jobs. Other great jobs I had, Morro Bay in California.
Yeah.
We cleared the beaches out there, one company or another. Japan, we had some jobs over there. Germany, worked there. That was seasonal, and every spring we'd go over to Bavaria.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that was good. That went on for I guess 5 or 6 years. And it turned out after the first year we sent all Americans over there. And a lot of the Americans just want to take off every day and go buy a cuckoo clock or something. Yeah. But we found that if we hired a German company, all we had to provide was a manager, a safety, and a quality control person. Send 3 guys over. And so that really worked out good. And I still hear from some of the Germans that we worked with. So, and yeah, they're getting old.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it was a good run. It's just, there's a lot of, there were some stories I don't ever want to get on tape.
Yeah. Those are for the quiet, select people.
To be told only around a bar somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Working the Navy side and then go on the civilian side, on the team aspect of it, how much different was it, having your Navy team in the form that it was, and it sounded like that changed throughout the years as it became a little more structured.
Well, Navy teams were sailors and trained the same way we were.
Yeah.
And so we spoke the same language. We trained together. We lived together. It wasn't that much of it. I mean, I was a team guy when I was enlisted, and hope I was considered a team guy when I was an officer.
Yeah.
The difference, commercial ordnance, is that you have all of the services that we got retired guys from the Air Force and from the Army and Marine Corps and all that. And so they're used to one way to do things, or
right.
Mostly smaller things. EOD is EOD.
Yeah.
But smaller things are operational. To me, the Navy teams always looked at working as you work till you're done.
Right.
And not everybody looks at it that way. It's, like, where the hell are you going?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm off. No, you aren't. What are you, crazy?
Right.
Well, especially when you work jobs where there's a tide.
Yeah.
You work the tide.
Yep.
And so, things like that. I mean, they weren't big things. They were just things.
Yeah. And
if you're a manager, they go away and, make it happen.
That makes sense. Going back to when you were working at the mobile units and then the what did you call it? The
shipboard units.
Shipboard units. The training for the EOD techs there. Did you have how was that set up? Did you have like a training department? Did you have somebody in charge of
training unit under a commanding officer?
Okay, so you still had the training unit at that time.
Yeah, he set up a training syllabus, I guess.
Okay.
But the thing is that our deployment schedule, he could set up training all day long, and there wasn't anybody there.
Gotcha.
No, we deployed everybody but the Commodore.
Yeah.
They were out of there.
Okay.
And so it wasn't like who can we send, it's who we got.
Gotcha.
And so they were trying to build things up. The Navy thought they solved the manpower problem at the upper levels by giving us billets.
Yeah.
They add them to your overall structure. So now you've got billets. Why aren't you going to war? Like, we wanted you to. And so the school, to their credit, always refused the people who wanted to cut the course. Well, do they really need this? Do they really need that? Well, you don't know till you get there.
Yeah.
You know, did we find foreign ordnance on all these other places? Oh, yeah. You know, you come across something and you don't really know exactly what it is. You look it up and it's from somewhere else, especially Vietnam. They were getting munitions from all over the place. In Iraq, somewhere I've got pictures of ammunition boxes in our open storage. And I walking by it one time and I happened to look, and there was the different countries who had sent this ammunition to, or they had bought it, I'm not too sure which, but we wound up with it from somewhere and had it in our ammunition area. And it so happened the boxes were stacked, and it was almost like a world atlas. Here's all these countries that had contributed. And then look over on the other side, and there was some we that they got from us through some channel.
Yeah.
Never sure where it came from.
Interesting.
But yeah, a lot of different countries. France, for example, and Germany, and all these people who were friendly to us had sold these guys ammunition.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you can find stuff all over the place. In the United States, you run across strange stuff. Grandpa brought something home from the war, you know.
Yeah.
And it's been on the mantle for, you know, weeks or years. And Grandpa says it's okay. And we had when I was at Crane, Indiana, we had a Grandpa who had a little room in the barn, and it always had a padlock on it. And Grandpa died, and so opened up the door, cut the lock, and when they got in there, they found Grandpa's whiskey, Grandpa's porn, and he had a case of old dynamite that he kept in there. Well, it's safe, right? It's in a locked room, and he had his chair. Well, this was on a cot with a mattress, and the stuff had leaked into the mattress. So we had the case of dynamite and the mattress to go.
Yeah. And
then later on, we found that it leaked down to the floor, the wooden boards, and so we pulled those out. But it was, you know, it was different, but it was pretty easy because you take it down to a stream. It happened to be one.
Yeah.
Take it downstream, soak it, and, you know, you're pretty good to go.
Nice. That is, I've actually heard that from, you know, similar things that, you know, Grandpa or Dad or whatever from the Shoredettes, that they had this totally inert cannonball round.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out not totally inert, sitting above the fireplace for years and years and years, and just got lucky.
Yeah, well, Group 2, the telephone company we used to send people out to where they were running trenches, especially when they got into Civil War battle areas.
Yeah.
Because they'd run a trench, and then boom, up would come cannonballs and a variety of things. And people look at cannonballs, and if they've rusted at all, it rusts over the fuses. And so it all looks like a plain, round object, steel. And the compartment inside of those is really quite small. So it's not like you can pick one up and say, well, you know, it's the weight difference. I know this. And so getting it out, I've even had people call me after I retired, and I refer them to Virginia Beach Police. They have a bomb squad. Yeah. And I'm not touching that stuff anymore.
No. You've done your time.
Yeah. All you got to do is take the fuse out of it. Not me.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I like to ask everybody, you know, and especially from you, who had, you know, much more time in EOD than I've talked to anybody so far. So definitely want to ask you this question.
They quit early. Yeah,
yeah, right. Quitters. Now, is there any advice or things that you would like to pass on to any, part of it, Navy, but then just any EOD techs from just anything that you'd like to pass on?
Yeah, nothing really comes to mind. If you take a look at the EOD, the way it's structured now, and the people that are in it, and the things that have changed, and for the better. Mm-hmm. They have continually over the years have improved things. They've improved the way of life. They're taking better care of their individuals. They're organized. They're recognized now as a valuable part of the military organization. Yeah. Instead of, who are these people and why are they there?
Yeah.
No, they seem to be doing pretty well without my advice. No, they. I don't know that they have the latitude that we had.
Yeah.
There is a guy. I didn't make the name up. His name was Darrell Waste. And Darrell was a first-class ordnanceman. He was in Japan at, I don't know whether it was Sasebo or one of those places that was supposed to have an EOD capability, and he was the only one there. And somebody told him about a projectile, and so he went and got it, and he disarmed it and didn't have anything more to do with it, so he mailed it from Japan to the EOD group in Hawaii. Well, how many things wrong there? One, he never should have been alone.
Oh, my goodness.
But things like that happen, and I think now when they go somewhere, for example, aboard a carrier, I've heard that they send an entire mobile unit or a platoon,
mm-hmm. Yep.
a number of people to a carrier, and then move them where they need them. And we were just part of ship's company, I think, for a long time, until the groups came along, and then it was, at the best, an officer and 2 enlisted. You can be heloed to another ship, but training and stuff like that, you're pretty much at the mercy of the OPCON.
Right.
And I think now they're recognized more as being an organization that runs their own operation. You don't have to oversee them as much.
Yeah.
So, no, from what I see, I've gone to, I still know a lot of the retired guys and some of the recently retired guys, and I think they're doing great. And this having enough captains and senior officers to put into the different commands to the upper levels, and the 2 admirals, and they've had some great ones. I mean, whoever's selecting them, they got enough captains that they can, select from there to get the admirals who are going to now maneuver around to these different places and get things done.
Right.
Where you were always, well, for example, when I was in the Pentagon, I worked for an admiral there that he had been in Vietnam, and he had been familiar with EOD, and he was our champion. So I was really lucky there. I had an admiral that was a single service manager in one place, and then I worked for one in the Pentagon in another place that were both advocates of EOD. So it didn't have to be that way.
Right.
You can get somebody who's, I could use your money to do something else.
Yeah.
So, no, maybe the active duty people could give me some advice.
Well, I did want to mention too, because you mentioned that you're coming up on your 50th anniversary.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Congratulations. And
congratulate her.
Yeah. She's had to put up with you for 50.
Yeah. Well, when I've been somewhere, I've always had her come over where I could, drag her through the war in Bosnia, and she got good trips to Germany and all that. And so.
Oh, that's great. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time and coming and sitting down and sharing.
It was good. I was to get ready for this. I had to sit down and think about what the order of these things were. I hadn't thought about it really in some order in a long time. And well, the thing is, the Soul guys, we still get together. There's a group of us that have a Zoom call every 2 weeks, retired
That's awesome.
guys. We're having a get-together in October. It's going to be in Arizona this time. The last one was in Texas. The association, EOD Association, been good, keeps everybody together.
Yeah.
And especially when the organization was much smaller than it is now.
Yeah.
And of course the old guys are weeding out too. But hopefully what you're doing here is that you get a history, of what happened, where, and when, and it's. I think we were talking earlier, I wish there was a way to capture the initial part of it.
Yeah.
Because when I came in the Navy in 1950, there were still a lot of World War II guys around.
Yeah.
It was only 5 years after the war. And so all that information was there. Of course, I wasn't EOD, so didn't know to do that.
Right.
But I worked for guys that had, been really involved and had served in combat and all that. So.
Yeah, I think that's important to try and that's like we were talking earlier. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this too is to get that information so that as the years go by, it's somewhere, so that further on down the line, somebody can reach back to this and see where it came from, because it is good. It gives you, I actually did one yesterday with Scott Weaver. He just retired, and one of the things that he said was perspective. Like you have to have perspective, and part of having good perspective is understanding where things came from, so that, we can get into, no matter where you are, you can get into the complaining side of things, because it's never as good as you want it, right? No matter how good it can be, it's never as good as you want it. But understanding where things came from and how far they've come, and how different things were, especially not that it was bad back in the day. It's just that's the way it was.
No, and I hope there's never anybody that hears this is that ever think that our early days were the worst ones that ever could. It was just the way things were at the time.
Yep.
I never thought of the organization that they have now.
Yeah.
I mean, that was so far out. it always seemed that there would be 2 or 3 of us in dungarees and a white hat that would go somewhere and do something ordnance related. That was EOD. That was the job that was very early. And then even while I was in, it was changing all the time, and you know, and got better slowly but surely as we gained some recognition, especially at the higher levels where we had never had any representation before.
Right. Yeah.
Bill Kadow, I mentioned in the Pentagon, and I relieved him. There was only one other officer that had served at the Pentagon, and he had kind of weaseled his way in through the executive manager of the single service program, and which was brand new.
Yeah.
And that was at the time a commander by the name of Chuck Naylor. That he didn't do much up there.
Yeah.
And Bill Kadow, I think, was the one that really took his 2 years and marched forward with it. And then I got into a couple things, and hopefully they helped. Yeah, so it needed to change, and it did. And actually, I was just, looking back on it, I was very happy to be a part of it. It's what I wanted to do. I knew that.
Yeah.
Even coming in, I had an idea of what it was that I wanted to do. Not a good idea, but just an idea. And that's what I wanted to do. So.
That's great. Being able to have that idea and then actually get to do what you want to do and do it for this long. That's awesome. And, again, I appreciate you sharing that.
I'm glad you're doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you for listening to the Echo Oscar Delta podcast, where we talk to Navy EOD techs and hear the stories that they want to share.